Welcome to John Carter Stories, Skip Christmas. You worthless burden. My son-in-law said it right across the dinner table. Not quietly, not under his breath. Loud enough for the waiter 3 tables over to glance in our direction. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my napkin down or push back my chair in anger. I did not give him the scene he was probably hoping for. I stood up slowly. I smiled, and I walked out. Left them sitting there with their $45 turkey plates and their artisan dinner rolls and their perfect little holiday evening. I walked straight out onto Park Avenue into the cold November air, and I let the door close behind me. And I thought, enjoy your holiday. But at 3 minutes past midnight, my daughter called. Her voice was not calm. Her voice was not the polished, measured tone of a PR manager who handles crises for a living. Her voice was shaking. Dad, you are on every CNN screen. What have you done? Please subscribe and like this video, and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you are listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I want to know where you are sitting right now, because what happened to this family is the kind of thing that travels. The kind of thing that lands differently depending on what you have lived through yourself. My name is Edward Raymond Collins. I am 64 years old. I live in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, in a 1-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over a park I walk through every single morning, regardless of weather. I spent most of my adult life working in investment banking before retiring 2 years ago, and I have always believed, truly believed, that family was everything, that loyalty ran deeper than blood. Turns out I was naive. My daughter Caroline is 33 now. She used to be my little girl. The one who waited by the window when I came home from work. The one who shared her dreams over Sunday morning pancakes. Talking about the things she wanted to do someday. The person she wanted to become. Smart, ambitious, beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with how she looks and everything to do with who she is. She became a PR manager at one of the big agencies in Midtown. I was so proud of her. I used to carry her business card in my wallet for no reason other than to look at it sometimes. Then 4 years ago, she met Daniel Whitmore. Everyone calls him Dan. Dan is 37, vice president of corporate development at a tech company called Apex Innovations. Tall, sharp suits, expensive watch that catches restaurant light, like it was designed specifically for that purpose. The kind of man who shakes hands like he is closing a deal, who smiles with his mouth and never quite with his eyes. When Caroline first brought him home, I noticed right away how he talked, his achievements, his connections, his future plans. He never once asked me a single question about myself, just nodded politely when Caroline mentioned I used to work in finance, like he was humoring a story a child had told, like I was furniture that had come with the apartment. The first year was tolerable. Dan played the role of attentive son-in-law well enough. He showed up for holidays, brought wine, complimented my apartment and the view. But I saw the calculation behind every gesture. The way he would steer Caroline away when I tried to talk to her alone. The subtle comments about how I should relax and enjoy retirement and stop worrying so much about them. By their 2nd anniversary, the mask began to slip. Dan started suggesting I was too involved in Caroline's life, that I called too often, that my perspective was outdated. And Caroline, my brilliant daughter, tried to balance both of us. She apologized for his curtness, made excuses about work stress, tried to hold 2 separate relationships together with her bare hands, while one of them quietly worked to destroy the other. I watched her slowly pulling away, convinced by this man that her father was somehow the problem. The worst part was seeing how Dan looked at Caroline's connections, her network, our last name. Collins carries a certain weight in specific New York circles, and Dan knew it. I knew it, but Caroline could not see it yet. Thanksgiving dinner this year was at a restaurant on Park Avenue, one of those places where the turkey plate costs $45 and the menu calls everything artisanal. Caroline had made the reservation weeks ago. Just the 3 of us, she had said on the phone, and I had heard the hope in her voice. The kind of hope that sounds like a question. I arrived exactly on time. Navy blazer, the tie Caroline gave me last Christmas. Dan was already nursing his 2nd glass of wine when I sat down. He barely looked up from his phone. Edward, he said. Not Dad. Never Dad. How is retirement treating you? Can't complain, I replied, settling in. Keeps me busy enough. Caroline squeezed my hand across the table. She looked tired. I noticed shadows under her eyes that her makeup could not quite reach. Dad, you look great. Have you been walking the park? Every evening, I said. Good for the mind. The meal started pleasantly enough. We talked about Caroline's latest campaign, some luxury brand launching a fragrance. Dan ordered another glass of wine. Then another. His cheeks flushed. His voice got louder. He started gesturing more dramatically. Caroline touched his arm gently. A warning I recognized. He shrugged her off. You know what, Edward? Dan leaned back in his chair, that watch catching the light the way it always did. I've been thinking, maybe you should skip Christmas this year. Give us some space. Just Caroline and me. The restaurant noise seemed to fall away. I watched Caroline's face go pale. Dan, we talked about this, she whispered. He ignored her. His eyes were locked on mine. The wine had done what wine sometimes does. It had loosened his tongue and brought up everything he'd been thinking for a very long time. Let's be honest. You're a burden, a worthless burden to this family. Every holiday, every dinner, you're there. Don't you have your own life? Caroline's mouth opened, closed. She looked between us, frozen, and I realized she was waiting to see if I would fight back, raise my voice 'cause a scene, give Dan the reaction he wanted, the one that would let him say, see, this is what I deal with. I did none of those things. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my untouched turkey. I stood up slowly, reached for my wallet. The waiter appeared, concerned. Is everything all right, sir? Everything is perfect, I said, and I meant it. I pulled out $300 in bills and handed them over. For your trouble and your excellent service. The waiter's eyes widened. Dan stared at the money, then at me. I turned to Caroline. Her eyes were wet, pleading, but she had not defended me, had not told her husband he was wrong, and that realization settled in my chest like ice, cold and clear and undeniable. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart, I said softly. Then I looked at Dan, really looked at him, and I smiled, not a warm smile, something else entirely. Enjoy your holiday. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my back straight. The cold November air hit my face as I stepped onto the street. Behind me, I could hear Caroline's voice rising, Dan's defensive tone, the beginning of whatever argument was coming for them. A worthless burden. The words echoed with each step I took. But instead of anger, I felt something else beginning to crystallize inside me. Clarity. Purpose. Dan had no idea who I really was, what I was capable of, what resources I actually had. And my daughter needed to see the truth about the man she had married. By the time I reached my building, I had made my decision. It was time to show them both exactly what kind of burden I could be. Before I tell you what I found when I walked into my study that night, I want to ask you something. Has someone ever underestimated you so completely, so confidently, that for a moment you almost felt sorry for them? That is where I was standing, in my own living room, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey, beginning to understand that this man had looked at me and seen absolutely nothing. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from right now, and whether someone has ever made that mistake with you. And please, if you have not already, subscribe, because what happens next changes everything for all 3 of us. The elevator ride to my 12th floor apartment felt longer than usual that night. I kept seeing Caroline's face, the way she had looked at me across that table, not quite defending me, not quite abandoning me either, somewhere in the middle, pulled in 2 directions by a man who had been systematically isolating her from the one person who had always protected her. I unlocked my door and stood in the entryway, looking at my home, modest by Manhattan standards. Clean lines, comfortable furniture, windows overlooking the park. Nothing that screamed money. Exactly how I had always wanted it. I poured myself a measure of whiskey and sat in my reading chair. On the side table sat a first edition of Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor, purchased at auction for $12,000. Dan would probably call that wasteful. Dan, the self-made man, the rising vice president with his $180,000 salary. He thought he understood success, thought he understood money and power. He had absolutely no idea. Rehook, end of part 1. I sat in that chair for a long time thinking about something Dan said during our first year of knowing each other, a Sunday brunch. Caroline was in the kitchen. He had leaned over and said, "Must be tough, going from a banking world to this." And he had gestured vaguely around my apartment, like it was something to be pitied. I had smiled and nodded and let him think whatever he wanted. But I had noticed things, too. The Rolex on his wrist, the Italian shoes, the casual weekend trips to the Hamptons on a salary that should have left him comfortable, but not extravagant. Either Dan had family money nobody mentioned, or he had income coming from somewhere else entirely. I had filed that observation away. It seemed very important now. Stay with me for part 2, because that night I walked to my study, removed a painting from the wall, opened a safe I had not touched in 2 years, and found the piece of information that would change everything. Dan thought he had pushed me out. He had no idea what he had just started. My study is a quiet room, books on 3 walls, a desk my father left me, a window that looks north toward the park. Behind my desk hangs a painting. Abstract expressionism. Nothing remarkable to look at. Most people glance at it and look away. I removed it carefully from its hook and set it against the wall. Behind it, a safe. I had not opened it in 2 years. Not since I had officially retired and decided to step back from active management. The combination came easily to my fingers anyway, the way some things do when the body remembers what the mind has half forgotten. The heavy door swung open. Inside, documents, contracts, account statements, Collins Capital Partners, my private investment fund, assets under management, $127 million. Nobody in my family knew it existed. Not Caroline. Certainly not Dan. After my wife Margaret died 15 years ago, I had made a choice. I could have retired loudly, bought a penthouse, flaunted the wealth, let it announce itself the way wealth tends to do. Or I could live simply, invest wisely through trusted advisors, and let Caroline make her own way in the world without the complicated weight that serious money always brings with it. I had chosen simplicity. Chosen to be comfortable retired banker Edward, instead of quietly wealthy investor Edward Collins. Looking at these documents that night, I wondered for the first time whether I had protected Caroline or simply left her vulnerable to people who would see her as an opportunity. My phone buzzed. A text from Caroline. "Dad, I'm so sorry about tonight. Dan had too much to drink. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message. No, he was wrong. No, you didn't deserve that. Just excuses wrapped in an apology. I typed back, "Nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. Enjoy your evening." Then I pulled out my chessboard, an antique set I had inherited from my father, set up a problem I had been working on for a week. White to move, made in 7. But my mind was not on chess tonight. Dan thought I was a burden, thought I was worthless. The man had expensive tastes on a modest salary. He had isolated my daughter, spoken to me with contempt, and expected me to simply accept it, to fade quietly into the background like a piece of furniture nobody wanted but nobody bothered to throw away. I thought about Margaret, what she would have said. She had always been the fierce one, the one who did not believe in waiting. "Rob," she would have told me, "you are too nice." Sometimes people need to learn what consequences feel like. I moved my knight, then my bishop. The chess problem resolved itself. Check, check, checkmate. I needed information first. Facts, numbers, evidence. The kind of careful, documented truth that does not bend under pressure. The next morning, I made a phone call to an old acquaintance from my banking days. Not a close friend, but someone who had owed me a favor for nearly 2 decades and had never been called to settle it. Until now. 20 minutes later, I had a name. Leonard Shaw, private investigator, former federal agent, specialized in financial crimes. I set up a meeting for the following week. That same afternoon, Caroline called, her voice careful, uncertain. "Hey, Dad, I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay after, Thanksgiving." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Chris feels terrible about what he said. He was stressed. You know how it is. I could hear Dan in the background, voice too low to make out words, probably feeding her the lines. These things happen, I said smoothly. Don't worry about it. So you're not mad? Not at all. In fact, I've been thinking about what Dan said, about giving you 2 more space. Maybe it's time I step back a bit, let you build your own life together. Relief flooded her voice, and it was the saddest sound I had heard in years. Dad, you don't have to. I want to, I said. Really, you're adults. You don't need your old father hovering around all the time. We talked for a few more minutes. Surface pleasantries. When we hung up, I could imagine Dan in the background, satisfied, thinking he had won. Let him think that. Let him relax and get comfortable and believe I was backing down. Meanwhile, I had work to do. Leonard Shaw's office was on Quiet Street in Chelsea, 3rd floor of an old brick building. No advertisement outside, no sign on the door. You either knew about him or you did not. The office was exactly what I expected. A metal desk, filing cabinets, monitors on a side table, a frame certificate on the wall. Leonard himself was early 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of build that said he still worked out but had long since stopped trying to impress anyone with it. Mr. Collins, he said, firm handshake, direct eyes. How can I help you? I laid it out plainly. No drama, no emotion, just facts. My son-in-law, Daniel Whitmore, vice president at Apex Innovations, salary $180,000 a year, living in a $3.2 million townhouse in Tribeca, wearing a $42,000 watch, taking weekend trips that should be well beyond his means. Leonard listened without interrupting, made notes on a yellow legal pad. You think there is money coming from somewhere else, he said when I finished. Not a question. I know there is, I replied. I just need you to find out where and how much. Financial investigations take time. Bank records, offshore accounts, corporate filings. Could be weeks, maybe longer. I have time. Leonard quoted me $15,000 for the initial investigation. I wrote a check on the spot, drawn from the account Dan did not know existed. We shook hands and I left. Walking back to the subway, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had played the harmless retiree. Stepped back, kept the peace, let Dan push me aside for Caroline's sake. Not anymore. I want to stop here for a moment because I need you to understand something. I was not doing this out of anger. Anger burns fast and leaves nothing useful behind. What I felt sitting across from Leonard that afternoon was something slower and steadier than anger. It was a feeling of a man who has been very patient for a very long time and has finally decided that patience does not mean passivity. Have you ever had to wait for the right moment? Have you ever had to watch someone get comfortable in a mistake they made against you, knowing that eventually you would be there when it mattered? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And stay with me, because 6 weeks later Leonard called and said, you need to see this in person. And what was on that desk changed everything I thought I knew about how deep this went. January crept by. New York settled into its familiar winter rhythm. Cold winds, gray skies, people walking fast with their chins down. I established a new routine. Morning walk to the park regardless of the weather, because the cold never bothered me and the park has a way of making the mind sharp. Afternoons reading or playing chess online. Evenings reviewing old investment documents. Refreshing my memory on corporate law. SEC regulations. Whistleblower protections. Just light reading. Nothing suspicious. Caroline called occasionally. Brief conversations. She mentioned Dan had received a new title at work. More responsibility. I congratulated her warmly. Did not ask questions, but noticed she did not mention bonuses or salary increases. Interesting. 2 weeks into January, I made another call, this one to a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Wren, partner at Wren & Associates on the 15th floor of a Wall Street building. Her firm specialized in corporate law, particularly whistleblower cases and SEC compliance. I had researched her thoroughly. Her assistant showed me into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. Patricia entered briskly. Charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, an iPad, and a leather portfolio. Your message said you needed consultation on a sensitive corporate matter, she said. Potentially, I replied. I may come into possession of information about financial irregularities at a public company. I want to understand my options for reporting it legally. She sat down and opened her iPad. Are you employed by this company? No. I would be receiving the information from an independent investigation. The information would pertain to possible fraud, kickbacks, offshore accounts, corporate vice president level. Patricia's expression did not change, but I saw the spark of interest behind her eyes. SEC whistleblower protections could apply. Tell me more. We talked for 90 minutes. She explained the legal framework, how to submit anonymous tips to the SEC, what documentation would be needed, how to ensure everything was done entirely by the book. Her rate was $450 an hour, worth every single penny. 3 weeks after my meeting with Patricia, Leonard called. Mr. Collins, you need to see this. Now. I grabbed my coat and headed for Chelsea. The document spread across Leonard's desk told a story I had not fully expected, and right there in the middle of it, a connection I had not seen coming, a connection that made the whole thing almost too perfect to believe. Stay with me for part 3, because what Leonard had found was not just evidence of corruption. It was proof that Dan had been stealing from a company that, without knowing it, was connected directly to me. He had been taking money from his own father-in-law for 3 years, while calling that same father-in-law a worthless burden. He thought he was clever. He had absolutely no idea. Leonard's desk was covered with documents, bank statements, wire transfer records, printed emails. He looked up when I came through the door, and I saw something in his expression that I had not expected. Excitement. The look of someone who has been following a trail for weeks and has finally seen where it ends. Your son-in-law has been very busy, Leonard said. He walked me through it. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $340,000 transferred in irregular amounts over the past 2 years. Wire transfers from shell companies that, when traced backward, connected to Apex Innovation subsidiaries. He is taking kickbacks. I said quietly, looks that way. I have also found email exchanges discussing consulting fees and commission structures that have nothing to do with his official job duties. I picked up one of the printouts. Read Dan's own words, written casually, arrogantly, discussing money like it was simply owed to him, like he had earned it by being clever enough to take it. Keep digging, I told Leonard. I want everything. Every transaction, every email, every connection. That will take time. I have time. Back in my apartment, that evening I poured a whiskey and stood at the window, Manhattan glittering below. Somewhere out there in a $3 million townhouse, Dan was probably having dinner with my daughter, probably complaining about work stress, probably checking his watch and his phone and his offshore account balance, probably thinking he was untouchable. I sipped my whiskey, and I smiled. In chess, there's a concept called the long game. You do not take pieces immediately just because you can. You position. You prepare. You wait for the exact moment when your opponent realizes they are already checkmated. They just have not seen it yet. 3 weeks later, Leonard called again. You are going to want to see this, he said. Something in his voice. Satisfaction. The tone of a man who has solved a puzzle that turned out to be more interesting than anyone expected. I was at his office within the hour. The new documents told a story I had not anticipated. One of the companies paying Dan those mysterious consulting fees was called Meridian Tech Ventures. I recognized the name immediately. Meridian Tech Ventures was a portfolio company of Collins Capital Partners. My company. I sat back in my chair and felt a slow smile spread across my face. The irony was almost too beautiful. Dan had been taking kickbacks from a company I owned. All those deals he had been so proud of. All that money flowing into his offshore account. I had been indirectly paying him the whole time, and he had absolutely no idea. What is the connection? Leonard asked, watching my reaction. Meridian is one of my investments, I said carefully. Tell me more about these payments. Leonard pulled up another document. Dan had lobbied for a contract between Apex Innovations and Meridian Tech Ventures. $8.5 million. In exchange, he had received $170,000 in consulting fees routed through 2 shell companies. That is a conflict of interest, I said quietly. He was getting paid to steer his company's business to a vendor he had a secret financial relationship with. Exactly. And I found 2 more similar deals. Different amounts, same pattern. Your son-in-law has been running the scheme for at least 3 years. 3 years, while calling me worthless, while pushing me out of my daughter's life, while sitting at holiday dinners with that expensive watch on his wrist, and that smile that never quite reached his eyes. I studied the documents for a long time, the dates, the amounts, the emails where Dan casually discussed his commission structure with people I had never heard of, so confident, so careless, so certain that he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. I need copies of everything, I said, organized into a comprehensive dossier. Already done, Leonard said. 47 pages, indexed and cross-referenced. Bank records, emails, wire transfer receipts. Everything you would need. I met with Patricia again the next afternoon. Same conference room. Same view of the financial district. I slid the dossier across the table. I have documentation of corporate fraud, I said. Kickbacks, offshore accounts, conflict of interest. What is my cleanest path to report this? Patricia spent an hour reviewing the documents. When she looked up, her expression was serious in a way that serious people are serious when something has genuinely surprised them. This is substantial, Edward. If reported properly, the SEC will be very interested. We are talking potential criminal charges, not just civil penalties. I want to do this right. Anonymous, by the book. No connection to me. She nodded. I can prepare an anonymous whistleblower submission. With documentation this thorough, they will open an investigation immediately. The source will be protected under federal law. How long to prepare? 2 weeks. Do it. Spring turned to summer. I maintain my routine. Morning walks, afternoon reading, evening chess. Leonard was finished. Patricia had filed the submission. Everything was in motion and completely out of my hands. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Because here's the thing about the long game. The hardest part is not making the move. The hardest part is sitting still afterward and trusting that you made the right one. Have you ever had to wait for justice to arrive at its own pace? Have you ever had to watch someone get comfortable, watch them relax into their arrogance, and just wait? Tell me in the comments. And stay with me, because summer became August, and August became the night I was sitting in my reading chair with a glass of whiskey, and my phone rang at 3 minutes past midnight. And everything I had been quietly building for months came to light on screens across America. Dan, I imagined, was feeling quite secure as summer moved along. His troublesome father-in-law had backed off. His deals were flowing. His offshore account was growing. He had won. He was comfortable. He had no idea the floor was about to disappear. The call came at midnight. Caroline's name on the screen, her voice high and shaking in a way I had not heard since she was a teenager. Dad, you are on every CNN screen. What have you done? Stay with me for part 4, because the next hour was the most extraordinary I had experienced in years. Dan showed up at my apartment at nearly 1 in the morning, and what happened in my living room that night was something neither of them was prepared for. Dan had spent months believing he was the most powerful person in any room. He was about to discover what that room actually contained. I reached for my remote, flipped on the television. CNN was running the story on full rotation. I recognized the financial corruption correspondent immediately. Behind him on the screen, a professional headshot from the Apex Innovations website. Daniel Whitmore, Vice President of Corporate Development. Below the photo, in clean network graphics, a single word: fraud. I took a slow sip of my whiskey and watched with what I can only describe as clinical interest. Documents obtained by CNN show a pattern of alleged kickbacks and conflicts of interest spanning multiple years. The correspondent was saying, an anonymous source provided bank records, wire transfers, and internal communications suggesting the vice president had received substantial payments through offshore accounts in exchange for steering company contracts. Dad. Caroline's voice cracked. Did you hear me? Dan thinks you did this. That this is revenge for Thanksgiving. Please tell me that is not true. I watched the screen. They were showing numbers. Dollar amounts. Account numbers with the middle digits redacted. Everything Leonard had found, filtered through the SEC and now bleeding into the public record. Caroline, I said calmly, I am a 64-year-old retired banker living on a pension of $4,200 a month. How exactly would I have the resources or connections to orchestrate a federal investigation? Silence on the other end. Muffled voices. Dan in the background, his tone sharp and panicked. I have to go, Caroline said. Dan needs me, but Dad, please. I am here if you need me, I said. Always. She hung up. I turned up the volume. The broadcast continued for another 20 minutes. More documents. More financial experts weighing in on the scope of what the SEC had found. I watched all of it with the quiet attention of someone observing a match they have already seen the ending of. Then the phone rang again. Caroline, her voice harder this time, more controlled. Dad, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you have anything to do with this? With what, sweetheart? Don't. The news. The accusations. Dan says you have been plotting against him, that you have been behind all of it. I walked to my window. Midnight Manhattan spread below. 1,000 lit windows. 1,000 separate stories. Caroline, if Dan is being investigated, perhaps he should ask himself why, what he did to attract this attention. He didn't do anything. Her voice wavered just slightly on that last word. Then he has nothing to worry about. The truth will come out. She hung up without saying goodbye. I considered going to bed. It was late, but something told me the night was not finished. So I poured another small measure of whiskey and waited. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Caroline. Dan wants to talk to you. We are coming to your building. I changed from my reading clothes into proper trousers and a button-down shirt, made fresh coffee, straightened the magazines on the coffee table. If Dan wanted a confrontation, we would have it in my space, on my terms. Over good coffee, he probably would not touch. The doorman called up 20 minutes later. Mr. Collins, you have visitors. Send them up, please. I opened my door before they could knock. Caroline looked exhausted. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and she looked younger somehow. The way people do when something has stripped away all performance and left just a person underneath. Dan looked like a cornered animal. Red-faced, eyes wild, his expensive suit rumpled in a way that expensive suits are not supposed to be. Come in, I said pleasantly. Can I offer you coffee? Dan walked past me into the living room. Cut the act, Edward. We both know what you did. I am sorry, I do not follow. I gestured to the sofa. Please sit. Don't play dumb. His voice rose. That report, those documents. CNN doesn't get anonymous tips out of nowhere. You did this. You orchestrated the whole thing. I sat in my reading chair and crossed my legs comfortably. That is quite an accusation. Do you have any proof? His face went even redder. I don't need proof. The timing is too convenient. I embarrass you at Thanksgiving, and suddenly I'm under investigation. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence. What I expect, I said calmly, is that if you have been taking money you should not have taken, you would face consequences eventually. These things have a way of catching up with people. I haven't done anything illegal. Then you'll be fine. Caroline stood between us, her hands trembling. Dad, please, if you know something, just tell us. His lawyer needs to understand what we're dealing with. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, the dark circles, the way she had positioned herself slightly in front of Dan, still protecting him, still choosing him even now, even here, even with everything laid out across every television screen in the city. Caroline, I said gently, I do not know anything more than what I saw on the news. Your husband is being accused of financial fraud. If he is innocent, his lawyer will prove it. If he is not, I shrugged, that is between him and the authorities. Dan stepped forward, his fists clenched. You smug old man. You think you won something? I did not stand, did not move, just looked up at him with the same calm expression I had worn when he called me a worthless burden across a Thanksgiving table. Dan, I said quietly, at Thanksgiving you told me to skip Christmas. You called me a worthless burden in front of my daughter in a restaurant full of strangers. You spent 2 years trying to push me out of Caroline's life, manipulating her, isolating her from the one parent she has left. His jaw tightened. Caroline's face went pale. Now you are being investigated for financial crimes. I continued. Whether I had anything to do with that or not, you should ask yourself a simple question. What kind of man treats people with such contempt that they might want to see him face consequences? This isn't over, Dan hissed. When I prove you did this, when I have evidence, then what? I raised an eyebrow. Sue a retired banker on a $4,000 pension? Good luck affording that lawyer. The color left his face. Because I think in that exact moment, for the very first time, Dan Whitmore began to understand that he did not actually know who he was dealing with. That his money, his connections, his arrogance, none of it was going to save him now. Caroline pulled at his arm. Dan, let's go. This is not helping. He yanked away from her, pointed a finger at me. You're trying to destroy us. Can't you see that, Caroline? But Caroline was not looking at him. She was looking at me, and I watched something shift in her eyes. The first real crack. The first genuine doubt. Let's go home, she said quietly. Please. Dan stared at me for another long moment. Then he turned and walked out. Caroline followed. She paused at my door. Dad, she whispered. I don't know what's true anymore. Then maybe it is time to start asking real questions. I said gently, not the ones Dan wants you to ask. She left without another word. I closed the door, returned to my reading chair. The television was still on, muted now, showing the same story on repeat. Dan's photo, the accusations, the investigation. I picked up my phone and sent a brief text to Leonard. Well done. His reply came back immediately. Just doing my job. I turned off the television and sat in the quiet dark, looking out at the city. Dan had called me a worthless burden. He had tried to erase me from my daughter's life. He had built his comfortable, corrupt little empire and believed himself untouchable. Some burdens do not disappear just because you wish them away. Some burdens have been quietly watching, gathering, waiting for exactly the right moment. Tell me in the comments. And if you have dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because the person reading this right now who has been dismissed, underestimated, pushed aside by someone who thought they knew exactly how much you were worth, I want you to hear this. The people who underestimate us do not do us a kindness. They hand us the clearest possible view of what needs to change. And sometimes, if we are patient enough and careful enough and honest enough, we get to watch the truth do its work. The next morning arrived like a freight train. My phone started ringing at 7. Caroline, then Dan's lawyer, then 3 reporters who had somehow obtained my number. I let them all go to voicemail and made coffee and sat by the window and watched the sun come up over the park. Dan's story was on the front page of the financial section. Led story on every business news channel. His professional headshot on screens across the country with the words corruption and fraud underneath. By noon, Apex Innovations had suspended his duties pending investigation. The SEC had opened a formal inquiry. His first lawyer was already positioning for damage control. Then came a meeting I had not expected, with the CEO of the company Dan had been stealing from, and a conversation that closed the circle on all of it in the most perfect way imaginable. Stay with me for the final part, because the courthouse comes next, and what happened after the verdict is the part of the story that I think about most. The coffee shop where Caroline asked to meet me was one of those places where the cappuccino costs $8, and they call it craft. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over a corner table, her hair pulled back without its usual care. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She stood when she saw me, and for a moment I thought she might hug me, but she just gestured to the seat across from her. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly. I ordered a black coffee and sat down. Waited. Let her gather herself. "Dan says you orchestrated all of this," she began. "That you hired investigators, manufactured evidence, destroyed his reputation because he embarrassed you at Thanksgiving. And what do you think?" She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know what to think anymore. Dad, his lawyer says he could face prison time, millions in fines. His career is finished, and he keeps saying you did this." I pulled a folder from my bag. A clean version of Leonard's findings. Just the facts. No mention of sources. Caroline, I want you to look at something. Not to hurt you, because you deserve to know the truth. I slid it across the table. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts. Emails discussing fee structures and commission arrangements. Financial records that bore no relationship to Dan's legitimate income. She opened it slowly. Scanned the pages. I watched her face as understanding arrived, the color leaving her cheeks, her hands beginning to shake. These are Dan's accounts. Read the emails, I said gently. She did. One dated 2 years ago, where Dan discussed using what he called the Collins connection to open doors at a potential client. Another where he described, to someone she had never heard of, his meal ticket wife. Oh, she whispered. That single word held everything. Caroline, look at me. I waited until her eyes met mine. Did I want him exposed? Yes. Did I hire people to investigate him? Yes. But I did not fabricate anything. I did not plan a single document. Everything in that folder is real. Your husband has been taking illegal payments for years, using your name and your reputation to advance himself while stealing from his own company. A tear rolled down her cheek. She brushed it away. Why didn't you tell me before any of this happened? Would you have believed me? Or would Dan have convinced you I was just a jealous father trying to control your life? She looked away. We both already knew the answer. He used you, I said quietly, and he tried to push me out so there would be no one left to see it clearly, no one protect you. When it all came down, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and flinched. It's Dan. He wants to know where I am. You are 33 years old. He does not get to decide who you see. You don't understand. He is scared. He thinks everyone is against him. She paused. Including me. Is he right? She stared at the document spread across the table for a long time, the paper evidence of 3 years of deception. Then she looked up. I don't know, she whispered. I genuinely don't know anything anymore. We talked for another hour. I did not push her, did not demand decisions, just let her process, ask questions, helped her see what had been made invisible to her over 4 years of careful, patient manipulation. When we finally left, she hugged me at the door of the coffee shop, really hugged me, the way she used before Dan. I'm sorry, Dad, she said into my shoulder, for not seeing it, for not defending you, for believing what he said about you. You have nothing to apologize for, I said. You love someone. That is not a crime. 2 weeks later, Caroline called. Dad, I'm leaving him. I've talked to a divorce lawyer. I'm filing next week. I reached through the phone and squeezed her hand the only way you can across distance. I am proud of you. Don't be proud yet. Dan is threatening to fight it. He says if I leave him now, he will expose you, tell everyone you were behind the investigation. She paused, then laughed softly. The way people laugh when something is so absurd a humor is the only response left, as if he has any credibility left. Let him try, I said calmly. He has no proof. Leonard worked under confidentiality. Patricia is protected by privilege. The SEC received an anonymous tip. There is no trail leading back to me. Still, he will make our lives difficult if he can. Caroline, your husband is drowning. People who are drowning flail around and grab at anything nearby. Don't let him pull you under with him. She went quiet for a moment. There's something else. I want the truth about something. She paused. You said you hired investigators. Where did the money come from? Your pension is $4,000 a month. Leonard charges thousands. So does Patricia Wren. Where did it come from, Dad? And there it was. My daughter, the PR manager, the woman who built an entire career on understanding how information flows and where it comes from. She had followed the thread all the way back. I need you to come somewhere with me, I said. Tomorrow. Can you take the afternoon? Where are we going? To meet Patricia. And then I'm going to show you something I should have shown you a long time ago. The next afternoon, we sat together in Patricia's conference room on Wall Street. I had asked her to prepare the documents and then leave us alone. Caroline walked in, confused, and sat across from me at the long table. I opened the first folder. Collins Capital Partners, account statements, investment portfolios, property holdings, asset allocations. Caroline's eyes widened as she scanned the numbers, then went wide in the way that faces do when a world is just shifted underneath them. Dad, these accounts. This says $127 million. That is correct. But I don't understand. You said you live on your pension. You have one bedroom. You wear the same 3 sweaters. The sweaters are comfortable, I said. She stared at me, and then despite everything, despite the tears and the lawyers and the man she was divorcing and the months of her life, she was still making sense of. She laughed. It burst out of her like something that had been held too long, warm and real, and genuinely surprised. The sweaters are comfortable, she repeated. Dad. I smiled. After your mother died, I said, I made a choice. I did not want money to define our relationship, did not want you choosing your path based on wealth. I wanted you to build a real life with real people who cared about who you are. So I lived simply, let you find your own way. Until I married a man who used me anyway. That is not on you. Dan is a professional. He would have found an angle regardless of how you came to him. I pulled out another document. But here's the part he does not know. One of the companies that paid him those kickbacks, Meridian Tech Ventures. That portfolio company belongs to Collins Capital Partners. Caroline's mouth opened. Your husband spent 3 years taking illegal payments from deals connected to my investments. I continued. He thought he was so clever, building his secret fortune, skimming money off contracts. All that time, he was taking money from the man he called a worthless burden. She stared at me, then she started laughing again. Not the warm laugh from a moment ago. Something wilder. The kind of laughter that lives right next to tears. He has no idea, she said. He still has absolutely no idea who you are. No, I agreed. He does not. We sat in silence for a moment, the city stretching out below us through the floor-to-ceiling glass. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you divorce him. You move forward. You build something better. And I go back to being your father. Just your father. With a little less pretense between us. She shook her head slowly. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Dan held a press conference 3 weeks later. He rented a room at a midtown hotel, invited every media outlet he could think of, and stood in front of cameras looking like a man who had not slept properly in a month. The confident vice president from Thanksgiving was gone. His suit hung loose. He had lost weight. His hands trembled against the podium. I am here today to reveal the truth, he began, voice unsteady. I have been a victim of a coordinated attack by my father-in-law, who could not accept that his daughter had moved on with her life. I watched it from my apartment, with a cup of coffee going cold on the side table. A reporter interrupted within minutes. Mr. Whitmore, the SEC has confirmed 3 offshore accounts in your name containing more than $500,000. How do you explain that? Dan's face went red. Those accounts were for legitimate business purposes. The emails had been taken out of context. He was floundering, sweating under the lights. Every answer made him look more guilty than the one before. I turned off the television. Watching him was not satisfying. It was just sad. The sad spectacle of a man who had bet everything on the idea that he was the smartest person available and had been wrong the entire time. The CEO of Apex Innovations called me the following week. Jonathan Reed. He suggested we meet at a coffee shop on 42nd Street. Neutral ground. He ordered a black coffee and got directly to the point. I want to thank you, he said. For what? Don't be modest. My security team did their work. I know you were behind the investigation that exposed Whitmore, and I am not here to threaten you. Quite the opposite. Whitmore was bleeding my company. His corruption could have destroyed everything we built. You saved Apex Innovations. I said nothing. I also know you are considerably more than a retired banker on a pension, Reed continued. Collins Capital Partners. Impressive portfolio. Very quietly managed. Is there a point to this conversation? He smiled. Direct. I like that. Yes. I want to discuss an investment opportunity. Apex is looking for new partners. Serious partners with capital and integrity. I think Colin's capital partners might be interested. The irony was almost too perfectly constructed. Dan had spent 3 years trying to profit from Apex innovations through corruption, and now the company's own CEO was sitting across from his father-in-law asking to build something together. I will have my fund managers reach out. I said, we will see if there's a fit. We shook hands. As Reed left, I sat there for a moment. Dan had tried to build his empire on my daughter's name. Now his empire was dust, and I was being invited to partner with a company he had tried to exploit. In chess, they call it zugzwang, a position where every possible move makes things worse. Dan was in zugzwang, and he had put himself there. The courthouse was in Lower Manhattan, a gray building that has witnessed more moments of consequence than any of us will ever fully know. I sat in the back of the courtroom with Caroline beside me, her hand occasionally reaching for mine. Dan sat at the defendant's table with his third lawyer, a public defender who looked like he had accepted this assignment with deep reluctance. The confident man from the restaurant on Park Avenue was not present. In his place sat someone who had aged a decade in 8 months. Smaller, somehow, like air had been let out of something. The judge read the verdict. Daniel James Whitmore, guilty on 12 counts of fraud, accepting unlawful payments, and filing false tax returns. Dan's shoulders dropped. He had known this was coming, and yet hearing it still broke something visible in his posture. The court sentences you to 8 years probation with strict oversight, a fine of $3,800,000, permanent prohibition from working in any corporate or financial capacity. I watched his face as each condition landed, saw the last remnants of his pride give way. His mouth opened slightly. Just a small, broken sound came out. Caroline squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. When it was over, Dan was let out. He did not look at us, did not look at anyone, just kept his eyes on the floor. Outside the courthouse, Caroline and I stood on the steps and watched the city move around us. Is it wrong that I don't feel sorry for him? She asked. No, I said simply. Actions have consequences. He made his choices. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at me with something I had not seen on her face in years. Something open and unguarded and real. Dad, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I wasn't making it easy. I put my arm around her shoulders the way I used to when she was 13 and grinning at cameras with her braces, and I just held on for a moment. You never have to thank me for that. I said. That one was never optional. We walked to a coffee shop, neither of us ready to go home. Over cappuccinos, Caroline told me about the apartment she had found. West Village, 1 bedroom, a window that looked onto a tree she liked. I pulled an envelope from my jacket. I wanted to give you something. She opened it. Inside were property deeds to a 2-bedroom apartment in the West Village, purchased 5 years ago and held in trust under her name. Dad, what is this? Your mother and I bought it when you graduated college, just in case you ever needed it. I have been holding it, waiting for the right time. Her eyes filled, not the frightened tears of the past months. Something else, something lighter than that. Relief finding its way out as the thing it actually was. You've been looking out for me this whole time, she said. The whole time. You are my daughter, I said. That does not come with conditions. She cried then, really cried, and I let her, because some things need the room to be exactly what they are. Several weeks later, I sat in my reading chair, the same one where Caroline's midnight call had found me. But the city lights outside meant something different now. Not the beginning of a plan, the settling of one. My phone rang. Caroline. Hey, Dad. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner this Saturday. Just the 2 of us. And I want to hear about Mom. Real stories. Not the polished ones we always tell. The actual messy, honest, real ones. What she was actually like. I smiled. I would love that. Should I make a reservation somewhere? I was thinking. I said, we could go back to the restaurant on Park Avenue, where this whole thing started. I think it is time to make a different memory there. She was quiet for a second, then softly, Yeah, Dad, let's do that. After we hung up, I sat for a while looking at the chess set on my side table. The endgame problem I had been working on the night after Thanksgiving, the night everything began. I had solved it months ago, but left the pieces where they were. Now I reset the board. Started something new. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. The Apex Innovations Partnership Agreement had been finalized. Collins Capital Partners and the company Dan Whitmore had spent 3 years stealing from were now building something together. Legally, sustainably, the right way. The irony, as always, was almost too perfect. I looked at the photo on my desk. Caroline and me, taken 20 years ago. She was 13, grinning with her braces, my arm around her shoulders. We had a new photo now, taken last week at her apartment. She was genuinely smiling in it, not performing it, actually smiling. The weight I had been carrying since Thanksgiving, the anger and the determination and the patient, careful need to make things right, it had lifted, not because Dan Morrison was broken, because my daughter was free, because she knew the truth, because she had the tools to build something real now. Dan had called me a worthless burden, and I had shown him, quietly, carefully, completely, exactly what this burden could do when someone finally pushed it far enough. Justice settled, family restored, life moving forward. In chess, the point of the endgame is not to destroy your opponent. It is to reach a position where the outcome is no longer in question, where the board tells the truth, so clearly that continuing is simply a formality. We were there. The game was over. And the best part, the part one will think about when I sit in this chair on quiet evenings for the rest of my life, it was never really about winning at all. It was about Caroline, safe and clear-eyed and free, ready to walk into her real life. That is worth more than any victory. That has always been worth everything. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight. Share your own story if you have one. Tell me about the moment you decided to stop being invisible. Tell me about the person who underestimated you and what happened next. You are not alone in this. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and finding your way back to yourself. And if you want to hear another story like this one, there is one waiting for you right now. Thank you for listening. Truly,